All right, we have come to the last chapter of the book of Hebrews. As we've been going through this, and just as a recap, chapters 1 through 10 of the book of Hebrews was really the author that we don't know for sure who it is. But chapters 1 through 10, he was kind of dealing with orthodoxy. In other words, foundational doctrines or correct beliefs. And he went through a bunch of things, talking about the supremacy of Christ, how we should view Jesus and who he is, what it is for salvation, not neglecting salvation. The author talked about apostasy. He talked about Jesus as the great high priest, laid foundations for redemption, for sacrifice, all of these correct beliefs that his Jewish audience should have concerning Jesus, concerning these things, and all these correct beliefs that you and I should have today. And then chapters 11 through kind of the beginning of 13, but really 11 and 12 is kind of like this bridge where it's no longer correct belief or correct doctrine, but he gives us a view into what faith lived out looks like. And we spent quite a bit of time in Hebrews chapter 11, the Hall of Faith, going through all of these Old Testament characters that the author gave us and seeing how faith played out in their lives. And then in chapter 12, we see him talking about Jesus being the founder and perfecter of their faith. He reminds them of this. And then right here in chapter 13, it's kind of a shift to orthopraxy. In other words, correct conduct or the correct practice that these Jewish readers should have. And it's the correct practice that we should have, something that we should see taking place, the fruit of our lives, if we believe in Jesus and if we are followers of Christ. And so we're going to jump into that. We're going to see three main points in our text today. We're going to be reading verses 1 through 6 of Hebrews chapter 13. And we're going to see three things. First thing, notice, is that our writer is encouraging his readers and us to be loving, then to be pure, and finally to be content. And so if you want to read with me, Hebrews 13, verses 1 through 6. He says, "Let brotherly love continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. Remember those who are in prison as though in prison with them, and those who are mistreated, since you also are in the body. Let marriage be held in honor among all, and let the marriage bed be undefiled, for God will judge the sexually immoral and adulterous. Keep your life free from the love of money, and be content with what you have. For he has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. So we can confidently say, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do to me?" So this is our text today. And the first point, be loving, verses 1 through 3. And I'm going to break those down, look at each verse individually. And I see verse 1, let brotherly love continue, this call to his readers and us to be loving amongst each other. He says brotherly love. This word brotherly love is found in one Greek word, Philadelphia. Most of us are probably familiar to that. We know that the city of Philadelphia is the city of brotherly love. It's this love of deep friendship and partnership. Special and spiritual affections that should exist between believers of Jesus Christ because of our connection of being saved by Jesus. This is the word that he uses, let brotherly love continue. And he says, let and continue at the end. And those two words in our English are different, but it's the same word in Greek. It means to remain or abide. Remain or abide in brotherly love. And that word has three applications. It means to remain or abide in reference to a place, in other words, not departing, to be kept continually. To remain or abide in reference to time, so to last or to endure. And to remain or abide in reference to a state or condition. So author says this brotherly love, this deep affection that you as believers, because of Jesus, should have with one another, let it continue. In other words, you're called to demonstrate an actual love that doesn't leave, that doesn't fade away, and that doesn't change. This is the first part of orthopraxy, putting into practice the type of conduct that these Jews should have in our lives, the type of conduct that we should have, played out because of the correct doctrines, the correct belief that we have. This is part of that fruit. We should have a love for one another that doesn't leave, doesn't fade away, and doesn't change. The author also seems to presume that brotherly love has already existed for these Hebrews. And it probably has. They actually had a much more loving community. Their culture was much more welcoming, loving, and this is something that was already going on, but he encourages them to continue doing so. And we don't exactly know why, but we also know that there was this temptation for them to fall away. That's why the author so many times had been encouraging throughout this whole book, if you would just continue, if you would remain, if you would stay steadfast, continue to the end, this idea of not falling away. And so he says, let this continue. Let brotherly love continue, because maybe they were going to fall away. We also know that persecution was pretty heavy during this time. And so when persecution comes, right, I think of just, even again, when COVID hit, right, something that wasn't persecution at all, but adversity hit, you could kind of quickly see brotherly love starting to deteriorate. And so maybe in this time when adversity comes through persecution or preferences that are different or any of those things, they need, just as we do, this reminder, let brotherly love continue. Be loving amongst each other. Secondly, he says, verse 2, do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unaware. Be loving amongst each other. Second, be loving to strangers. The writer is telling his readers not to neglect to show hospitality. And this word specifically refers to Christians who are strangers to them. And neglect is no longer care for, to be forgotten, to be uncared for. The word to show hospitality, it's a phrase. That phrase, to show hospitality, is philoxenia, which literally means brotherly love to strangers. So the same love that we're supposed to demonstrate to one another as brothers and sisters in Christ that we need to let continue, he says show that same type of brotherly love to strangers. And I think this makes sense for a number of reasons. Early Christians traveling around, especially if they were traveling around to teach about Jesus, as Christ had told them, go into all the world. Teach them all that I have, like all of these things. And we see Paul going out, and that's how Christianity spread. When they did that, they didn't have what we have. They couldn't hop on Google and find local nearby churches, or if there was like a Christian bed and breakfast, or they just literally showed up in town praying that there were other believers and hoping that those other believers would show hospitality to them as a stranger. That was the only way to travel. Don't neglect to open up your home to other believers and show them hospitality. He says, for some have entertained angels unawares. This is kind of an odd statement. We don't have a whole lot of depth in this, but we have a couple examples of people entertaining strangers. If we were to look back in Genesis chapter 18, Abraham is sitting around his camp, and three strangers approach him, and he hops up, and he recognizes one as calling him my Lord, but there's these two other men with him, and he's like, come, have a seat. He gets water so they can wash their feet, and he bakes them cake, and he entertains them. In the very next chapter, in chapter 19, the two strangers that were with the Lord, they happen to just appear outside of the city gate where Abraham's nephew Lot is. And Lot just hops up and shows them this incredible hospitality and is generous to them, entertaining angels. Who knows how we have had that opportunity? But I think of Jesus' words in Matthew chapter 25. He says, for I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you a drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will answer them, truly I say to you, as you did it to the least of these my brothers, you did it to me. The point the author is making to his audience is lovingly welcome and show hospitality to strangers that you don't know. After all, the only thing of real importance that you have in common, even if that person is a stranger, if you have Jesus in common, that's the only thing that matters. That's one of the beautiful things about the body of Christ. You can walk in here, or I can travel somewhere else. Anytime I go on vacation, I look up just churches in the area. Lord, like, where's another group of believers that I can worship? And I can walk in there, and I don't know anybody. But there is this bond that is deeper than any other bond that is formed because we have Jesus Christ in common. His death on the cross I don't have to know anything else about that person to know that we can show brotherly love and affection and hospitality to one another. This is what he's saying. Do this to strangers. And finally, to wrap up the first point of being loving, verse 3. Remember those who are in prison as though in prison with them, and those who are mistreated, since you also are in the body. So be loving amongst each other. Show hospitality to strangers. Be loving by remembering those in prison and who are mistreated. What about those who no longer have their freedom? Those who are in prison and can no longer fellowship in person with one another. I think we have some sort of idea what this was like. Again, think back to COVID, when it was mandated, don't gather together. Like, what did isolation do to so many people? What did isolation do to so much of the church and even outside of the church? To students who couldn't be in school, and to elderly and people who just couldn't gather. That type of isolation, and how anxiety skyrocketed and depression skyrocketed and suicide skyrocketed. And these people, because you couldn't gather together, and Zoom was great and technology is fantastic, but it is not the same as looking somebody else directly in the eye. It's not the same as being able to give somebody a hug. And our author is saying, don't forget those who are in prison. They're alone, they're isolated. We don't know for sure because it doesn't say, but again, it's not probably too much of a stretch to think that maybe Paul was the author of this book. Possibly not, but even if we think of somebody like Paul, he knew very well what it was like to be in prison, especially because of preaching the gospel. And that might be why the author has mentioned this. He could be referring to, don't forget those who are in prison. They're there because they are sharing the news of Jesus Christ with those around them. And because of just doing what Jesus has called them to do, they no longer get to fellowship with us. Don't forget that. Paul knew what it meant to be apart from the fellowship of believers, to be isolated, but he also knew what it meant to know that those who were on the outside had not forgotten him. The type of comfort it was to receive letters and to know that believers were praying for him. And that's why we have letters from him while he's in prison, encouraging those who were outside about how content he can be. I think of the phrase, out of sight, out of mind, and I know this is true for me. And I think it's true for these readers, which is why the author says, look, be loving with those that you get to meet with, your brothers and your sisters, every day and every week. Don't let petty differences get in the way and preferences divide. We need to be united. Don't forget to show hospitality to believers as they come. Show them this welcome, but also do not forget those that are not with us right now because they're in prison or they're being mistreated. Love one another. In Romans 12, Paul says to love one another with brotherly affection. And then he goes on to say that we should rejoice with those who rejoice. We should weep with those who weep. A brother of mine, as we were studying this, he sent me a text, and I loved what he said. He said that we are now chained to one another. We're chained to one another. We are one body, one inheritor. When one suffers, all suffers. Isn't that what the text says? Those who are mistreated, see, you also are in the body. This hit home to me. I remember about 5 years ago or so, I woke up one morning. It was just a very normal morning. I got out of bed. My neck felt tight, and so I decided to stretch it. And I don't know what I did, but I stretched it wrong, and I slipped a disc and pinched this nerve, and my disc slipped, and everything on this side of my body, in my neck, spasmed. And I had the joy of walking around like this for 2 months, just looking like an idiot. And the nerve that was being impinged, I had lightning bolts going down the left side of my arm, and I couldn't really feel some of my fingers. And it took 2 months before the muscles finally relaxed. But I remember trying to work out, trying to do a push-up, and I just collapsed because something happened with the nerve in my tricep, and it was horrible. It was the most painful experience I'd ever been through. It took 9 months before I finally felt normal. But I was thinking about that, and I'm my legs were totally fine. The right side of my body was fine. It was just I had this injury in my neck. But because my neck was injured, even though I could have gone for a run, my legs were capable. They were able. I would have loved to have done it. I remember trying to do that, and just running caused pain and agitation, and so my legs were hindered. They were fine, but they were part of my body, and my neck was injured. And because of the injury in my neck, it inhibited my whole body from doing anything that I would have been able to do before. And I think this is what I think of when I think about this, when he says, remember those who are in prison. Remember those who are being mistreated, for you are all of one body. When one suffers, to some extent, we all suffer. If we're going to really show brotherly love and affection, if these Jews are really going to show brotherly love and affection, it means we need to recognize and empathize and pray for and remember those who are in different situations than we are, especially if they're difficult or they're in prison. Now, when we look at the New Testament and we look at the life of Christ, I want to make sure this is clear. We're obviously, because we are followers of Jesus, called to show love to everybody, to show hospitality to everybody. We should remember everybody in prison. I'm so thankful there's prison ministries. I'm so thankful that all of those things exist. And I'm not saying not to do that. But here the author is specifically pointing to the need for them to demonstrate this to one another within the body. Paul in Galatians 6:10 says, so then as we have opportunity, let us do good to everyone, especially those who are of the household of faith. And I think of Jesus' words in John 13, by this everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. So it's not that, just do this, tuck in, just love each other and you'll be good. No, but it needs to start there, especially for this particular audience who the persecution is going to be immense and the difficulty they're already having is immense. Start here. Don't forget, be loving. Secondly, point number 2, be pure. Be pure in the home, specifically. Verse 4, let marriage be held in honor among all, and let the marriage bed be undefiled, for God will judge the sexually immoral and the adulterous. Our author now shifts, if we have these first 3 verses, kind of this broad view. Be loving amongst one another, be loving to strangers, but remember those that are in prison. It's this overarching picture, and now he gets more focused. He narrows in. And he talks about that intimate relationship between a husband and a wife within marriage, that between spouses. And he says, let marriage be held in honor among all. Not just the husband and wife of that particular marriage. All, individually, collectively, as a whole. Those who are married, those who are not, young, old, all people are to view marriage as God designed it to be, as something that is precious, that is esteemed, that is held dear, that is that of great value and worth. Think about marriage. It's the first human relationship that God instituted. He created Adam, and when he finally said, that's not good. It's not good for man to be alone. He didn't create a buddy. He didn't create an accountability partner. He didn't create a mom. He created a woman to be his spouse so that the two could be joined together in one flesh. And from that relationship of marriage comes every other relationship that we have. Out of marriage comes the relationship between a parent and a child, between children as siblings, and cousins, and aunts, and uncles, and grandparents, and then friends, and so on and so forth, out of marriage. And so our author, for whatever reason, takes this opportunity, probably because we're not so different now, or they weren't so different then as we are now. There's always this assault on marriage. Let it be held in honor. And what is to be held in honor? The marriage bed is supposed to be undefiled. The marriage bed, this refers to the physical intimacy between a husband and a wife. The physical sexual joining together of a man and a woman becoming one flesh. Jesus said, therefore, a man shall leave his mother and father and be joined to his wife and become one flesh. They are no longer two, but one. So the author is saying, let the marriage bed, physical intimacy between a man and a woman, by God's design, be undefiled. And that word means free from stain, blemish, evil, or corruption. It's the same word used to describe Jesus as our great high priest back in chapter 7 of Hebrews. It says that, "For it was indeed fitting that we should have such a high priest, holy, innocent, unstained, separated from sinners, and exalted above the heavens." That's what the marriage bed is supposed to be. In other words, pure. Keep the marriage bed pure according to God's purpose, between one man and one woman in the covenant of marriage, for the purpose of reproduction, for the purpose of physical pleasure, for the purpose of physical and spiritual intimacy, because that's how God designed it. And what defiles the marriage bed? How does it become impure? It's what he follows it with: those that are sexually immoral and adulterous. And in the context of this passage, sexual immorality refers to those who have sex without the commitment of marriage, outside of God's design. And the adulterous, those who are not faithful to the vows that they have given to their spouse and to the Lord, and they have sexual relationships outside of the covenant that they made. Keep that undefiled, he says. And why? This should be all the warning that they need, and they held God, I believe, in a much higher light than we did. But this should be enough for us too. Why? Because God will judge the sexually immoral and the adulterous. He will judge them because they are working against his design for sexual intimacy. When you step outside of that, he's telling his readers, he's telling us today, you are putting yourself in the place of God. When God has said, this is the way that I have designed it, and this is my plan, and we say, nope, I'm going to do something different, we essentially say, I'm God. I know what is best for me. You don't know. I'm going to do what I choose. God will judge that. And this is just as important it is today, if not more so. Divorce rates and adultery within the church are skyrocketing. David Guzik, he has this quote: "The enemy of our souls wants to do everything he can to encourage sex outside of the marriage bed. And he wants to do everything he can to discourage sex inside the marriage bed. Christians must recognize this strategy and not give it a foothold." In other words, his audience, this author's audience, and us today, we have to be intentional about this, because if we're not intentional about this, we're not just going to naturally drift towards holiness and drift towards purity. No, we drift away if we are not fighting for it. The readers of this letter are called to be pure, and you and I are called to be pure. Be loving, be pure, and finally, be content. Verses 5 and 6. Keep your life free from the love of money, and be content with what you have. For he has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. So we can confidently say, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do to me? So once more, I see another shift. Again, from the big picture, brotherly love with everybody, to more focused, hey, keep the marriage bed undefiled. Marriage needs to be held in honor among all. And now he pinpoints it even more. The relationship of our heart in contentment with the Lord. We are told to keep our life free from the love of money. The word life here is speaking to the character of a person. Doesn't mean you can't have money. Doesn't mean you can't need money for things. It means the character. I don't know who said this quote, but I remember hearing it a long time ago, that reputation is what other people think you are. Character is what you truly are. And that makes sense to me, because a reputation can be crafted. A reputation can be molded and manipulated. And I can do a lot of different things to get people to think a lot of different things about me. Whereas the character of who I really am, if someone saw that, they might say, that's not at all who I thought you were. I didn't know you. Those are two different things. So when the author is addressing his audience in this verse, I think what he's telling them to do, or asking them to do, is be introspective. Who are you really? Keep your life free from the love of money. Don't stand on what others think of you, what the town thinks of you. The real you. You want to keep that part of you, your character, your heart, free from the love of money. This free from the love of money is also translated as free from covetousness. It's not just money, it's that idea of coveting, this painful awareness of someone else's possessions or advantages and a desire to have them. Keep your character, who you are, free from looking around to your left and your right and wanting so badly what somebody else has. I think of David on the rooftop looking at another man's wife and then looking at her longer and longer and wanting her so much that he takes her. The author of Psalm 73 said that my feet had almost stumbled, my steps had nearly slipped, for I was envious of the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. Speaking of just looking at what the wicked had and wanting it so much that he almost stumbles and falls flat on his face. I think it's important to know that this doesn't always play out in a real obvious fashion. When I think of desiring something more than anything else, forgive me again, but the first thing that came to my mind was The Lord of the Rings. And I know not everybody knows The Lord of the Rings. I won't name names. That's okay, but there's this character named Gollum. And Gollum is like this short, skeleton-like creature with just gross skin and massive beady eyes and maybe has 2 or 3 teeth, and he's balding, and the little hair that he does have is long and scraggly, and he's always looking for and wanting what? The ring, my precious. I'm not going to do that voice. Have it on video for the rest of my life. My precious. It's like the only thing he cares for, and he will manipulate and seek after and go crazy just for this ring. And so I don't think we should look at ourselves and be like, oh, I don't look like Gollum, I'm good. Because Gollum wasn't always Gollum. Before Gollum existed, he was Smeagol, this cute little hobbit. Lived amongst other cute little hobbits with big feet. And he looked just like this normal person. And he found this little ring in a river one day. And over time, just focusing on this ring and becoming obsessed with it and wanting it more than anything else, it transformed him in this hideous creature called Gollum. And so we might look like a Smeagol on the outside, but maybe we're a Gollum on the inside. Even Jesus said that to the Pharisees. You're whitewashed tombs. So don't just think, oh, I look really good. The question I ask myself is, what do I focus on a lot? What keeps my attention? Again, I remember very well in college, I wanted a motorcycle. And I didn't want a motorcycle. I wanted a super bike, like a fast motorcycle. And not just anyone. I wanted the super bike that was shown in The Matrix 2, the Ducati that Trinity hot wires and like rides off the back of like the 18-wheeler and is going the wrong way on the highway. And I was like, I want that motorcycle. And I learned everything about that motorcycle. And I'd go to the Ducati website, and I would like build and spec my own. And I would search. It's when you still had to look in newspapers to see if anyone was selling like Ducatis. And then this strange thing started to happen. Like everywhere I went, I would see a Ducati. And I was like, oh my gosh, like they're everywhere. And not just like a Ducati, I'd see like super bikes everywhere. It's as if like I had scales on my eyes and one day they just all fell off and there was just this world of these beautiful Italian motorcycles just everywhere. And which one is going to be mine? And I found that's called something. It's called frequency illusion. Simply put, frequency illusion happens because you pay more attention to things that have recently become more important to you, and then you see them everywhere. So I think of like this idea of coveting, like what comes to my mind so often. But he says, keep your life free from coveting, the love of money. And what's the solution for that? When you're in the middle of that? Well, everything is just right in a row, perfectly laid out. The remedy for it, be content with what you have. Content to be satisfied, to be enough. Satisfied with what you have. Live knowing that what you have is enough. We can live knowing that if God doesn't give me anything else for the rest of my life, if I never make another penny until the day I die, I have everything that I need. Everything. If I never move into another home, if I never build another relationship, those things would be sad and it would be difficult. But the reality is, if I get nothing else from the Lord, I have everything I need because Jesus died on the cross for my sins. Be content with what you have. But how is that possible? Well, I'm thankful for our author. He says, for he has said, I will never leave you or forsake you. How can I be content? Oh, by reminding the Lord has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. All throughout Scripture is God reminding his people, I'm not going to leave you. I'm not going to forsake you. Tells it to Joshua. Tells it to everyone he ever called, like, you can go do what I'm asking you to do because I'm not going to leave you. I'm not going to forsake you. Job said, naked I came from my mother's womb. Naked I will return. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Paul said that he learned to be content in whatever state he was in abundance and in little, free, in prison, sickness, health. All things I can do because Christ strengthens me, because I have Jesus. Contentment comes from the presence of the Lord in our lives. Keep your lives free from coveting. How? Oh, be content. Okay, I want to. Why can I be content? Reminding yourself that God said he will never leave you or forsake you. Oh, that's right. And what's the result of when we do that? Then we will confidently say, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do to me? Man, I have to imagine the readers of this letter, I'm hoping they get fired up because they need to be, because this was not a fun time to be a believer. This was a time to look around at the prosperity of everybody else and see, well, the Jews have already been oppressed, and now following Jesus, just persecution is rampant. But we can confidently say, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do to me? It's quoted right from Psalm 118, verse 6. And I love that word helper here. It describes the Lord as poised and ready to rush to the relief of his oppressed children when they shout for assistance. Poised and ready. Not some king on his throne, kicked back, taking a nap. No, poised and ready to rush. In the same way that I think of when this author tells us back in Hebrews 4 that we can boldly come before the throne of God to obtain mercy and to find help in time of need. Just as we can boldly come forth, we can confidently say that he is our helper. He is poised and ready. The God of the universe, of heaven and earth, is ready to rush to their sides to help them. Therefore, what can man do to me? Nothing of eternal destruction. Nothing. What can man do to you? At best, what did Paul say? Like, to live is Christ, to die is gain. Like, man, I'd prefer to go home. You want to take my life? Sweet. Paradise. They can confidently say that. And I truly believe these Jews need that. To be reminded, to be fired up. Yeah, I don't want to fall away. I need to remember who Jesus was. I want to finish this race. I want to keep going. And I need you to my left and to my right as my brothers, as my sisters, to love me, to encourage me. Like, let's not forget these people who are in prison, because I might be there one day and I don't want to be forgotten. Be loving. Let's be pure within our marriages. Let me hold your marriage in honor. Hold my marriage in honor. Let's teach our children to hold marriage in honor. Let me stick to these commitments, and then I need my heart to be content. And so I leave us with this as an application. The question, am I content? Am I content? And I hope that we don't just answer that too quickly. Think, yeah, I'm pretty content. And there's things I want that I don't have, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. And then we go on and we have a great Mother's Day and we have a great week and we have a great summer. Maybe that's true, but really maybe take the time to ask that question. Examine what comes to your mind often throughout the day. What do you really think about more often throughout the day? Is it money? Is it a new home? Is it a better job? Is it a better car? Is it a family? Is it a boyfriend or girlfriend, a fiance? A spouse? Vacation? Warmer weather? All the time? Think about those things. If I can be honest in front of you guys, go home and be honest. Because the truth is, and I say this all the time, wherever you go, there you are. Whatever new thing you bring into your life, you're still there. Whatever bad thing you remove from your life, although that's really good, you're still there. I believe the problem always starts in our heart. I love Psalm 139. The very end, he says, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any grievous way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." Maybe ask the people in your life, your spouse, your accountability partner, your life group, your prayer group, people that know you. Hey, do you think I'm content? But be ready for an honest answer. Just yesterday, as I was reading through Proverbs 12, the very first verse, he who hates reproof is stupid. And I stopped and I was like, did it really say? It said it. If I hate reproof, if I hate correction, if I hate people speaking truth into my life, I'm the fool. It might not feel good, and again, it probably won't if we just look back to Hebrews 12, talking about discipline. It is for discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons. At the very end, in verse 11, for the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant. We could insert reproof, the reproof of a brother or sister speaking truth into your life because they see something that isn't healthy, feels painful, and we're going to want to say, well, you're mean. That hurts my feelings, and that's unkind, and that's not true. But do you know this person? Do they love you? Do they care for you? Because although it seems painful rather than pleasant, later, what does discipline do? It yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. If I ask my wife, am I content, and she gives me a blunt answer, I shouldn't be mad at her. I should say, wow, Lord, why have I been so blind to this? I want to be content. And here's why I want to ask that question. I think the order in which we do things matters. The first thing that Jesus wants from us is our heart. And I can't just change my behaviors and automatically my heart will change. I think of Jesus' words in Matthew chapter 7, like the most sobering words of all of Scripture to me. Many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? Did we not cast out demons in your name? Did we not do many miracles in your name? And he will look at them and say, depart from me, I never knew you. That's really scary if you think about it. Did I not do this and this and this and this and this? And Jesus is going to say, God's going to say, I never knew you. Just doing things is not going to change and transform your heart. Now, this doesn't mean that we don't do anything. This isn't a pass, just be like, well, sweet. I'm just going to sit back and you do your thing, Lord. And then once you have, I'm probably going to automatically pop up and start doing the things I should. No, James says that faith without works is dead. Paul says that he disciplines his body. There are lots of things that we are called to do as believers, as followers of Christ, that we don't want to do or we don't feel like doing, that we should do and need to do because we call ourselves Christians, because we have been saved. I do a lot of things like that, but I see it as this cooperation of sorts. I don't want to love my enemy. I don't want to pray for those who persecute me, but I will do those things. Sometimes I don't want to love with brotherly love, my brothers and sisters, but I will do those things, and here's the difference. While I do those, I simultaneously say, Lord, will you please change my heart in the midst of this? Will you transform my heart so that more and more I will want to do these things? And not only that I want to do these things, but eventually, like, my heart will be so transformed that I just naturally do these things without even have to think about doing these things. Will you make me so content with you? I have all that I need in you. My heart is so content and so at peace with you. And I look more and more like Jesus every single day, that the natural overflow of that is just Jesus pouring out of me. So I am going to do what I need to. I'm going to do what you've told me to do. I'm going to discipline myself, but I need you to do what only you can, which is change my heart. And then what happens? A heart that is changed and transformed by God will result in people holding marriage in the place of honor that it's called to be more naturally. It will result in people more and more as brothers and sisters remembering those who are in prison and praying for them, and remembering those and praying for those that are mistreated. It will result more and more of us not neglecting to show hospitality to strangers, and it will result more and more with us continuing to show brotherly love to one another. Because if my heart isn't focused on Christ, if that's not the object of my affection more than anything else, then my heart is probably divided. And if my heart is divided, then for me personally, I'm really struggling to hold marriage the way it needs to be. I'm really struggling to remember and care for those that are in worse situations than I am. And I'm really struggling to love my brothers and sisters. So if I go back to my heart and say, Lord, I need you to fix this. I don't want to just keep doing things and not asking you to do what only you can, which is change this. I want to actually become like Jesus, not just have a reputation of someone who does these things. So our readers are called to be loving, be pure, and be content. And that's the same for us today. Lord, I just thank you for this time. I thank you so much for the privilege of gathering with brothers and sisters, opening your word. What an amazing gift that you have given us. This book that we can open day after day and that we can study and we can spend time with you and we can learn about your character and you teach us and you mold us. It is alive and active, Lord. Thank you. I pray you just bring clarity to our hearts and minds, Lord. Would you just put your finger on maybe just one or two things in each of our hearts that we need to let go of or give over to you, Father? Whatever you convict us of, Lord, whatever we bring before you, whatever you ask us to give up, we know that is more than worth it. Thank you for being good, Lord. Thank you for being loving towards us. Thank you for being patient towards us. You are so good. We're so gracious. We love you and we ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.